This is the second half of our two-part videos on our canoe trips down the Yukon over a period of 40 years. This next video will cover the actual trip on the river itself. And it'll cover the places, the people, and the stories of things that happened. As you can see here, we started in Sitka, took the ferry to Juneau and Haines Skagway, got off in Skagway, and then drove over the pass into a little bit of British Columbia to Carmacks, and then drove through Carmacks and made a hard right east and through Jake's Corner and Johnson's Crossing. Once in Johnson's Crossing, there's a bridge. That was our put-in point. We got in the water there and headed northwest down the Teslin River.
Yeah, we took the ferry up to Haines and then to Skagway, and on up into Johnson's Crossing. Said goodbye to wives and kids and etc. at the ferry terminal, and got on the ferry.
And the ferry trip was a normal one when we used to have them. A lot of sightseeing. Boys often played some sort of card game. One time we had lost a radiator and actually did repairs on the ferry. Sometimes we had to stop in Juneau.
Well, we were in Skagway. There wasn't a whole lot of time spent in Skagway. What we did is we checked all of the canoes, either on the tops or on the trailer, to make sure they weren't going to fall off. Checked the wheel bearings to see if they were overheating or such. And then we finally entered the Yukon, and they put up during some centennial time or something the 98?
The fancy sign?
Yeah, the fancy sign, the road sign. And we wished they'd been there the whole time, because that's a great place to take some pictures.
Customs usually wasn't a problem. Being Boy Scouts, we always had our paperwork together, and being Boy Scouts, I think they just kind of scooted us through. You know, one time there was a kind of humorous situation in which they thought they broke our shotgun, but it was okay. The pass is a great place for pictures. Again, into the Yukon to Johnson's Crossing.
The put-in, yeah, Johnson's Crossing. This is, from here, it's 250 miles to Carmacks, and we're pretty much on our own, and we just wanted to make sure that the people that were going with us understood that.
Just before we pushed off, Mike would gather the people together, adults and kids alike, and give them a cautionary talk about it's a long way to help once we leave the bridge.
We're all in this together, and we leave here, there's no help when we get down to Carmacks. So we are it.
On the same trip as the last video, this was just a few minutes later, and as you can see, the weather changed.
Wait a minute. Okay, here we are in the middle of the sunny Yukon, having a great time. We got a little small rain shower right now, but I think we'll be able to manage okay. See you later. Okay, there's the second boat launched.
Sometimes we would line up before we left and take a group picture. We wish we'd done it for all of them, but unfortunately we didn't. This first half deals with the journey downriver from Johnson's Crossing to Hoodalinkwa, meeting the Yukon, then traveling down the Yukon to Carmacks. You can see that if you look closely at the green map. The white map here just shows from Johnson's Crossing to where we met up with the Yukon. The first night, question marks, we never knew where we were going to camp. It would depend on what time we got there. The first planned campsite was Mary's River. After that, the next one would probably be Sandy Beach Camp. And then the last night on the Yukon would be Mason's Landing. After we left Mason's Landing, we would get to Hoodlingua and the Yukon River. It's a long way to resupply. The Carmax, you could get clean clothes and actually get store-bought showers sometimes.
Right, yeah. That the slide here is leaving Johnson's Crossing. That's my wife Ann in the bow, me in the stern. And Gary and I decided that the wives should experience what we did, so we went on a family trip.
This is our first night camping. Each one of these is actually a different place. And also after the first day, it was always good to get together and talk about a few things that happened that day, like in the upper central one, and talk about how to handle it, how to handle things on the river. The Teslin is like we didn't take off from Whitehorse and Lake Labarge because Lake Labarge is big and windy, can be dangerous actually. The Teslin is a narrow, friendly, very remote river, and we just thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and as one person said, it's a very intimate river, sometimes too intimate.
But not always friendly, as you can see from this. Our only picture of a turnover. We didn't have many, but this was the cause. This was caused by an eddy turn. Hit it wrong, and the force of the water going in two directions flipped the canoe. The next night's camp was Mary's River, which was just a spectacular campsite. It's flat, it's open. The view is stunning, as you can see in this picture.
Okay, Mike, where are we? What are we doing? What's going on?
Well, that's a lot of questions. We're at Mary's River Campground. We came in pretty early today, and we've been fishing mostly, fighting bugs a lot, and just finished supper and put my fly gear away. Beautiful day.
People catching fish here?
Oh yeah, lots of them. Kids having a good time. They may slowly be fished out. The boys, that is.
The next day would be Sandy Beach Camp. We got that name because you come around a corner, the river's very narrow, and there's a stretch of sandy beach that the kids often went swimming.
Well, Mr. Bagley, what's the morning report?
The morning report is showered, but clearing by afternoon.
All right.
11.
That sounds good.
And I don't know anything, so I can predict anything I feel like.
This is the second half of our two-part videos on our canoe trips down the Yukon over a period of 40 years. This next video will cover the actual trip on the river itself. And it'll cover the places, the people, and the stories of things that happened. As you can see here, we started in Sitka, took the ferry to Juneau and Haines Skagway, got off in Skagway, and then drove over the pass into a little bit of British Columbia to Carmax, and then drove through Carmax and made a hard right east and through Jake's Corner and Johnson's Crossing. Once in Johnson's Crossing, there's a bridge. That was our put-in point. We got in the water there and headed north west down the Teslin River.
Yeah, we took the ferry up to Haines and then to Skagway, and on up into Johnson's Crossing. Said goodbye to wives and kids and etc. at the ferry terminal, and got on the ferry.
And the ferry trip was a normal one when we used to have them. A lot of sightseeing. Boys often played some sort of card game. One time we had lost a radiator and actually did repairs on the ferry. Sometimes we had to stop in Juneau.
Well, we were in Skagway. There wasn't a whole lot of time spent in Skagway. What we did is we checked all of the canoes, either on the tops or on the trailer, to make sure they weren't going to fall off. Checked the wheel bearings to see if they were overheating or such. And then we finally entered the Yukon, and they put up during some centennial time or something the 98?
The fancy sign.
Yeah, the fancy sign, the road sign. And we wished they'd have been there the whole time, because that's a great place to take some pictures.
Customs usually wasn't a problem. Being Boy Scouts, we always had our paperwork together, and being Boy Scouts, I think they just kind of scooted us through. You know, one time there was a kind of humorous situation in which they thought they broke our shotgun, but it was okay. The pass is a great place for pictures. Again, into the Yukon to Johnson's Crossing.
The put-in, Johnson's Crossing. This is from here. It's 250 miles to Carmack's, and we're pretty much on our own. And we just wanted to make sure that the people that were going with us understood that.
Just before we pushed off, Mike would gather the people together, adults and kids alike, and give them a cautionary talk about it's a long way to help once we leave the bridge.
We're all in this together. And we leave here, there's no help. So we get down to Carmack. So we are it.
On the same trip as the last video, this was just a few minutes later, and as you can see, the weather changed.
Wait a minute. Okay, here we are in the middle of the sunny Yukon, having a great time. We got a little small rain shower right now, but I think we'll be able to manage okay. See you later.
Okay, there's the second boat launched.
Sometimes we would line up before we left and take a group picture. We wish we'd done it for all of them, but unfortunately we didn't. This first half deals with the journey downriver from Johnson's Crossing to Hoodalinkwa, meeting the Yukon, then traveling down the Yukon to Carmack's. You can see that if you look closely at the green map. The white map here just shows from Johnson's Crossing to where we met up with the Yukon. The first night, question marks, we never knew where we were going to camp. It would depend on what time we got there. The first planned campsite was Mary's River. After that, the next one would probably be Sandy Beach Camp. And then the last night on the Yukon would be Mason's Landing. After we left Mason's Landing, we would get to Hoodalinkwa and the Yukon River. It's a long way to resupply. The Carmack's, you could get clean clothes and actually get store-bought showers sometimes.
Right, yeah. That the slide here is leaving Johnson's Crossing. That's my wife Ann in the bow, me in the stern, and Gary and I decided that the wives should experience what we did, so we went on a family trip.
This is our first night camping. Each one of these is actually a different place. And also, after the first day, it was always good to get together and talk about a few things that happened that day, like in the upper central one, and talk about how to handle it, how to handle things on the river. The Teslin is like we didn't take off from Whitehorse and Lake Labarge because Lake Labarge is big and windy, can be dangerous actually. The Teslin is a narrow, friendly, very remote river, and we just thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, and as one person said, it's a very intimate river, sometimes too intimate.
But not always friendly, as you can see from this. Our only picture of a turnover. We didn't have many, but this was the cause. This was caused by an eddy turn. Hit it wrong, and the force of the water going in two directions flipped the canoe. The next night's camp was Mary's River, which was just a spectacular campsite. It's flat, it's open. The view is stunning, as you can see in this picture.
Okay, Mike, where are we? What are we doing? What's going on?
Well, that's a lot of questions. We're at Mary's River Campground. We came in pretty early today, and we've been fishing mostly, fighting bugs a lot, and just finished supper and put my fly gear away. Beautiful day.
Are people catching fish here?
Oh yeah, lots of them. Kids having a good time. They may slowly be fished out. The boys, that is.
The next day would be Sandy Beach Camp. We got that name because you come around a corner, the river's very narrow, and there's a stretch of sandy beach that the kids often went swimming.
Well, Mr. Bagley, what's the morning report?
The morning report is showered, but clearing by afternoon.
All right.
11.
That sounds good.
And I don't know anything, so I can predict anything I feel like.
This is Mason's Landing. We stayed there. It was a small community. It had an overland trail, I think maybe back up to Telegraph Creek. At the bottom of that small picture, you can see there's a mailbox right on the corner of that cabin. People would put letters in there or collect them, I guess.
And it was there our first trip.
Yeah, and then it just kind of disappeared and such. So it was a pretty good place to stay.
This is Mason's Landing from the water. In later years, you can tell that building is not nearly as high as it was in the last pictures. It had several outbuildings. My brother and I actually pitched our tent in one of them. As middle top, you can see the one below it is the same cabin years later. They used flattened 5-gallon kerosene and fuel cans for everything, including wall protection for fire. The stove is made out of them. And we thought it was interesting, they piled rocks by their stoves to keep an even heat in the cabins. We're looking forward to the 30 mile. The river that comes out Lake Labarge from Whitehorse is called the 30 mile. And many people say where the 30 mile joins up with the Teslin is actually the start of the Yukon. It joins up at Hootalinqua.
This is where we land in Hootalinqua. That cabin was used as, when we were there, as a water surveyor's cabin, and it was also a crossroads for the river traffic up there. So the Mounties put in a station up there to check people to make sure they had stuff that they needed, I guess.
You can vaguely see the Mountie station right below where the writing in this in the background.
Yeah, just up there. Yeah.
This is the view back to Hootalinqua. The top left picture, you can see the Teslin, which is brown, coming in from the left, and the 30 mile coming in the same level on the right. The 30 mile is much clearer, and they run side by side past Hoodlinkwa. You can barely see one of our canoes in the little inlet in this picture. This shows the old Mountie station in the upper right, and then they sent work crews in from time to time to fix up things on the river, and Mike is standing in front of the Mountie station on a later trip.
The upper...
Oops.
Yeah.
Back up one.
Yeah, there we go. That structure was put there by the work crew. It was a nice picnic shelter for us that we could cook into there and such. And we have, what is that called? Diamond Willow. That's where the Diamond Willow started. And we found them downstream from here quite regularly, and on islands of all places too. The kids would, boys would take it, cut it, strip it, and they had all kinds of uses for it, but really nice.
Also here, the river became more social since you have the Teslin traffic, which is pretty light, and the 30-mile Yukon traffic, which is much heavier, all meet at Hoodlinkwa, and everybody camps there. We had an interesting happening on one of our very first trips. My brother Mike was on the trip, and by accident, way back in the woods, he stumbled on this campsite that's shown on the left side of the screen. The campsite was a tarp, an orange tarp. It had everything you need to camp pretty much, except for sleeping bags and people. The tent was, you could tell it had been, a bear had ripped it apart. There were cans on the ground littered about. There were a bear chewing. In the picture, you can see there's still binoculars hanging from the trees. Right below the binoculars is knitting in a plastic bag. The knitting is outside of the bag and laid on the ground, but the yarn is still in the bag, like I've seen so many people do. Also, there were clothes on the bushes to dry. They were all women's clothes. Some of them were for a small woman, and some of them were for a larger woman. We never figured out how this could happen. They didn't walk out because you're so far from any place, but also there were no canoes or no watercraft. It was a mystery we talked about on every trip.
Yeah, Mike and I and Gary and the other adults went down to look for the bear, naturally. And there's a lot of brush down there. So Mike had the shotgun. I was trailing behind him. And that brush was about chest high. And somebody yelled, look out, there it is, there, get it, get it, get it. And Mike swung, I look at him, and he's got that shotgun up against his shoulder, and he's swinging it around looking, and I'm ducking, and it was a grouse that had flown up and just went right in Mike's face.
Right below, this is still in the Hoodlinkwa, but right below Hoodlinkwa is Shipyard Island, in which a stern-wheeler steamship was pulled up and left. The steamboats ran up until the 50s, and then in the 50s when the Alaska Highway came in and the Klondike Highway, there was absolutely no use for them, and they were all pulled up on shore and deserted.
This is the Evelyn. As you can see, it in the early trips was in pretty good shape. You can see the staterooms, and that was called staterooms because they were named after states, and the biggest one was Texas. And then by the time we left the last time there, the snow and everything had been crunching it, and it's just it's too bad it's in the condition that it's in. Yeah.
Once we left Shipyard Island, it was kind of a long day to Big Salmon. On this map, you can see Hoodlinkwa, where we joined up with the Yukon, and Big Salmon is directly north of that. After leaving Hoodlinkwa on one trip, we joined up with two guys. The guy standing in the picture with the red neckerchief was a teacher from Oakland.
Right.
And the guy standing next to Mike was a German who we found going in circles in the river. He had never canoed before. He didn't realize that if you had all the weight in the back, he was sitting on the back seat, plus he had his gear in front of him, that the wind would catch the bow and it was hard going. So we helped him out, and he appreciated so much he stuck with us until Carmax. Also, he'd never fired a firearm before and found that just fascinating.
Yeah, there's the Big Salmon mounting station, which is across the river from where we camped. And when we got there one year, that's all that was left of it. And that lower right picture, you can see a kind of a whitish gray area. That's where the mounting station was on the left. It was just totally gone. There was nothing. The trees had been just totally burned. There were no limbs, hardly any limbs on it. The ash was up almost over the tops in some places of our XTs, and it was absolutely totally silent in there. You couldn't hear the river, the wind, no critters or anything. It was just really strange. We were all looking at each other and going, oh, this ready for a horror movie.
Several times in this section we ran across paddlers on the Whitehorse to Dawson race. It's a race for a few people, but for others it's a chance to get a spotlight on a cause, like the group here were paddling for breast cancer awareness. Big Salmon itself, across the river from what used to be the mounting station, is a former First Nation village and trading post. And when we first trip had many cabins, and as the years went on, it had fewer and fewer.
And our troop leaders. Gary, how was the trip today?
First part was nice, the last part was rainy, and now it's nice again.
All
And
right.
it's always that way. Here.
Here.
We're at Big Salmon. We got our trusty tents up. And trying to figure out how to cook fish and chili.
All right.
And beets. Steve's looking forward to beets.
This has 2 1/4 cups of water.
There's 2 cans of beets.
Big Salmon was just a fascinating place to be. It was gorgeous in its own way. The deterioration it didn't detract any from it.
This is still Big Salmon, and had a birthday, and Gary and company baked a cake for her. I brought some presents along and such. In some of the other areas, later trips, you can see a fresh cabin. It was probably a hunting hut shack that somebody put in, and we stayed in there, put up a tarp one time, and then there's Rob Allen. And Rob is coated in aluminum and what I want to say,
Aluminum oxide.
yeah, the oxidation from the aluminum, and with bug dope and sunscreen and everything
An
else.
aluminum canoe.
Yeah, an
mix.
aluminum canoe and such. So he could have been Tin Man and the Wizard of Oz at that point.
And then leaving Big Salmon, it was on downstream to Little Salmon. It's again, if you look on the green map, it's a ways. It's kind of a long day.
Yeah, we met Sear, the guy that put in the dredge. He and another guy drug that thing up to the river, left it there for one summer, and then after that, when the Alcan was going in, they quit gold mining and went to work on the Alcan, the highway.
In this slide, you can see the way we found it the first time, and in the lower right, the way we found it on our last trip. We're getting close to Carmax, and so it's possible to get up this far by powerboat. And we ran across some weird, well, 2 weird buildings. The building on the far right and the far left have no function that we could figure out. They're not really high for caches, especially the one on the right. Those doors and ladders and steps didn't go to anywhere. Also, we found a few deserted camps with tents and gear still there and nobody around, and it had been there for a while. When we get to Eagle Rock, we know definitely where we're at because it looks like an eagle. And you don't always know where you're at on the river exactly, but here you do.
Yep. Hoodawinka to Carmax. Let's see where there's Hoodawinka, and then we've got Little Salmon. So Little Salmon is where the highway comes down. You can hike back out on a road and hook up and get to Carmax, or get back up down to Whitehorse or wherever.
So this is the first section road we hit
yeah.
since leaving Johnson's Crossing.
Right, yeah.
Little Salmon has a large native cemetery. When we first came down, we saw the spirit houses, a group of them, and then there weren't any for a while. And then there were again, and we later figured out that the ones between had rotted and fallen into decay, and they just kept adding to the ends of it along the river. There was also a building there that was a church and a schoolhouse at one time.
We also found at Big Salmon that there was spirit houses also. And during that fire that jumped the river, where the mounting station burned, they were able to save that graveyard. So,
by starting a backfire.
Yeah,
that's what they did.
And such. So you got some other buildings in here that natives have gone in, and I think they have probably fish camps and other things going on. There's a daycare sign, and
started put in some buildings that they weren't there on the first trips at all.
No.
And then from there, the next day, it's into Carmax. There are two campgrounds over that period of time. The upper left one was the one we stayed at later times. It's called the coal mine. And the one on the lower left was there. That campground was kind of a government one that was there on our first trips.
I got money. Uh-oh. Hey, look out. I got one. I'm going to take Gary. I'll go back.
Carmax Hotel.
What? What, Dad?
I feel like
They had the furthest camp away. I think they spent a little extra time at Carmax today, loading up on snacks, whatever.
Carmax is actually a truck stop and one of the few crossings of the Yukon by bridge. So we'd have the opportunity to take showers, buy some reef supplies. In one situation, during the night, someone threw one of our canoes in the river. We got up in the morning, it was gone. And it was a great sunny day, and the Mounties were all too anxious to jump in their powerboat and go look for it. They were wearing baseball caps and shorts. And actually they found it. The rope had hung up downriver, and they hauled it back for us. On the right-hand side, we mentioned that there was a race between Whitehorse and Dawson, and they would come through here and they would stop at Carmax. This family met us on the beach and asked if we had seen a canoe with a man and a boy in it, that the chase boat had already landed and they weren't there, and they feared for them. It was her husband and their brothers was in this, and they wanted to know if we had seen them, and we hadn't. But the next morning when we got up, we found them on the beach, and they said that they had showed up during the night.
Second half of the trip, 300 miles to Dawson.
these two maps, the green one shows that you can see Carmax, and it's very windy outside of Carmax, the river, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then it goes, this map doesn't look like that's halfway, but it's only a 50-mile difference, and on down to Dawson. The white map only shows as far as the White River, which is kind of halfway between Carmax and Dawson. On the white map, you can see Five Finger Rapids, we'll talk about Rink Rapids, Tatcham Creek, where we often spend the first night after leaving Carmax. Yukon Crossing, we camped there in early days, but later on passed it by. On down to Minnow, where we camped most often. Fort Selkirk, where we'd often spend 2 days because we liked it so much. Next campsite was Isaac Creek. We'd stop by Coffee Creek, camp at Kirkman Creek, and then definitely camp at the mouth of the White. For some people, Carmax was the start of a trip if we were just doing the second half.
We had to prepare ourselves for Five Finger Rapids. The first time through, we didn't know what to expect, but we knew that we were going to have to do something to make sure that we didn't have a bunch of capsizes. So they have all these willows growing along the bank. So we cut the willows and made catamarans out of the boat. We kept the bows about 3 feet apart and the sterns 4 feet apart to keep the water from building up and slopping in too much.
Oh yeah, well, we got the poles.
Oh, good.
We'll let you decide whether or not we've got two good poles. Go on the far side of it. Oh wait, no, there's a street, but we'll go to near side.
On later trips, they'd built a viewing platform above Five Finger Rapids, so people from the road could walk down a whole lot of steps and watch people go through and view the carnage. Five Fingers is the only rapids that can't be avoided. Some years they're fairly tame. Other years they're very strong. In fact, one year, a person behind us, we didn't know it till the end of the trip, actually died going through the rapids.
Don't hit us!
This Five Finger Rapids, one year Gary and I decided that why not? We cut away from the troop and we went into Five Finger Rapids, made an eddy turn, went up onto that island, the rock up there, and climbed up on top and had a great view. And yeah, it was interesting.
The right below Five Finger Rapids is Rink Rapids. You can see in the lower right, it stretches across, but on the very far right, if you could see it, there's a way through where there are no rapids at all. So we would nose out into Rink Rapids on what we thought would be exciting. And the upper left, you can see one time we nosed out too far, and the pole broke, and that canoe ended up underwater, but we didn't lose any gear. It never overturned or anything. It was still attached, so it turned out okay.
I was quite content with the ride myself. Some kids got wet, but all in all, it was a pretty good ride.
Now this is the view from our campsite, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And the cook crew is getting started. We've got
God bless the cook.
Unceasingly, by golly, he needs it. He does.
In this picture on the upper left, you can see where we got the idea for the fire irons. This is Tatcham Creek, where we almost always camp because it would take us that long to it's not very far from Carmack, but between time lashing and getting through the rapids, we would almost always camp at the creek.
Yeah, this is Yukon Crossing, and the building in the upper right was a roadhouse, and the stern wheelers would stop there, and you could get back to Carmack's and Whitehorse and such overland, and have to got you around the rapids basically. And the other, you can see the building's deterioration over the years down at the bottom there, just being propped up.
And we're still fairly close to the road here. You couldn't see it, but you could hear it. And we continue on to Minto. Minto would be the last of the road, where we'd separate. The road would go one way, we'd go the other. Minto over time changed. When we first started, it was used by some trailer camping and motorhome camping, and later on in the lower left, you can see it now became a crossing for a mine that's on the other side of the river. The Minto in the center photo, low, you can see was a huge open expanse, and even after it was no longer used as a campsite, the pump still worked. It was kind of the immortal pump. This is a view of Minto, and again shows how large it is, and kind of reminds us, one time we pulled in there and it was like the Old West. There was a city there almost, and they were mushroom hunters. If you remember back across from
Big Salmon?
Was it Big Salmon? Yeah, the huge fire that had happened there. Well, for 3 years after that, morel mushrooms grow, and there's a group of people that start in the lower 48, follow the mushroom bloom up north as it progresses, and there were drying rocks. The whole place was inhabited and a hub of activity.
We got there, we didn't take the trip at the same time every year. It kind of depended on weather, what we wanted to do. Some of the kids liked to fish and others didn't, so that's how we did it. But sometimes we had native group down there at Fort Selkirk area, and they were fishing. They had a fish wheel down there, and they were hanging and drying. And yeah, it was interesting. They had bears in camp and chased them out, and got a bear dog that took care of that.
And then from Minto, our next stop would be Fort Selkirk. Fort Selkirk is, as you can see, quite far from any place because the road left at Minto. However, there is a road partway down to Pelly in which people that work at Fort Selkirk, and we'll say work, we'll explain it in a bit, can get there fairly easily. We're in the Minto Flats. That's why it was so curvy in that map. The river isn't very fast here, but thank goodness, quite often there was a tailwind, and we would erect sails, and sometimes we'd scoot right along.
Fort Selkirk was established to make sure that it didn't become part of Alaska and the United States. The Canada force was at the upriver part of that, and they were stationed down there. One time,
it was to wave the flag, Canadian flag.
Yeah, and at one time there were more Americans in the Yukon than there were Canadians, eh? So they just wanted to make sure it stayed in Canada.
However, when the Alaska Highway and the Klondike Highway went in, there was absolutely no reason for Fort Selkirk. The military had moved out long before the 1950s, but it was a hub for river traffic and riverboats, steamboats. But now everything was transported by truck over roads, and so in the early 50s, everybody left within a period of a couple months, and the place became a ghost town.
Yeah, this is Scott Foss Sr., I believe, with Danny Roberts at Fort Selkirk. Danny was born there, grew up there, and came out and you signed his book. And he was always around, talked, chatted, gave us stories and such of Fort Selkirk. And there was another woman there too, Moira, that had also met and greeted us.
When everybody moved out that one summer, Danny and a friend were upriver cutting logs for buildings. And when they returned, there was hardly anybody there, and so but he just stayed on. But over the years, when more and more river traffic has built up, some years there's quite a few people at Fort Selkirk, as you can see in the lower right, and some years, even now, there's still not. The cabin in the lower right, was there and available to river travelers. But again, over the years, it was no longer, it was used by the work crew. Here's an aerial photo of Fort Selkirk. The work, every summer the Canadian government sends in a First Nation work crew to help keep the buildings up from deteriorating. And their camp is in the very top left corner. And then at the very far right is the old military post area. The white building, the white area across from the point of the island is a recent First Nation potlatch house and meeting place. The buildings scattered in the center part are the buildings that are left of the town of Fort Selkirk. You can see the church steeple shadow in this picture poking up.
The Episcopal Church, there were two churches there. There was a Catholic church back in the woods and Episcopal church, which you could see from the river. And stained glass windows, they kept heat in it and took very good care of that building.
The Anglicans had a schoolhouse for all the kids that were in the area, and the three people in the photo were teachers, so we thought that was appropriate.
This is some pictures of Fort Selkirk. The one in the center's fireweed that just grew crazy over there. It's just beautiful. The bottom one at the middle is, I believe, the post office that was left there, and a store on the bottom right. And Danny's something camp.
I'm not sure why that was there.
Yeah,
but nobody ever stayed there.
No,
I know of.
No. So anyway, just some leftover buildings. Catholic church in the back, pretty setting. Actually, somebody decided that they needed to cut those trees down that framed the church, both the birch and the fir. I don't know why they did it, but they did.
A lot of people stop at Fort Selkirk, and we almost always spent 2 days there, just exploring the place, resting, talking. So it was very social sometimes. The guy with the antlers was from Switzerland, and he found that moose skull, and he was bound and determined to get it back to Europe. On one trip, there was a group of songwriters that came down from Pelly, and they got together and were writing songs, and we had a lot of music. Upper right is a storyteller, was there sometimes. One year, there was a forest fire nearby, and Fort Selkirk was used as a staging area to fight the fires. Mike mentioned the woman that was born there, and she was there some summers. She was born in the cabin behind her. The two women in the canoe below her are her granddaughters. She asked us if on the trip down to Dawson if we'd keep an eye on them. She was a little concerned about some of the people that were at Fort Selkirk.
Oh, yeah, I thought the music was playing.
No, not yet.
We met a group of guys there at about 3 or 4 times, and they love country western music, and they would take the winters and travel around the Yukon territory with their fiddles, guitars, whatever, and sing, and that's how they earned their winter wages.
One of them was Danny's, the guy that lived there, his brother.
Right.
But in the summer, he was part of the work group.
The guys that were singing, you would swear Hank Snow was on stage. They had that accent.
Yeah, I wish it was a better recording.
Yeah, it was amazing. And the bottom right is another graveyard, spirit houses. There was quite a few of them there. And in the upper left also, a cache. And notice the kerosene tin cans around the posts at the bottom to keep the critters out. They couldn't get any purchase on the cans, apparently.
Also, the spirit houses are just a fascinating mixture of Christian and native symbolism. They were fascinating.
We found signs that Tlinkits had been there because
and the Tlinkits traveled over the pass,
right?
And would trade in.
Right, they traded.
Fort Selkirk
pretty much owned the pass.
And then Mike wasn't on this trip. These were the people that Moira was kind of concerned about. They are true woods people that live in the Dawson area, and they were retracing the steps of a famous Canadian explorer and Hudson's Bay employee, Robert Campbell, and they were the greatest people. They had amazing skills. They were good canoeists, good people. They killed a moose, as you can see in the lower left, and they killed it, processed it, and had it smoking by nightfall. They were a good bunch of people. On this trip, again, Mike wasn't on this one. This was the songwriters, and at the same time they had the firefighters there. And so they had people playing instruments, and not just these two, but some others. And this was the guy on the right, it was a firefighter. The guy on the left was part of the songwriting team. Also, a couple times, there was this man on the left who would be there and tell stories at night.
The teacher placed the young lad inside the willows, so, and his purpose there was to call an animal, and he wasn't to move, for if he moved so much as his toe, he would disturb that around his foot, and his teacher would know that he had no patience. So the teacher went on down the lake.
Then it was from Fort Selkirk, and our next campsite would be Isaac Creek. Some of the days were kind of long, and it's getting later in the summer, so quite often it's warm. On the lower right, you can see a white outcropping that's known as Sam McGee's ashes, and it's the ashes from some volcanic thing but Sam McGee is much more colorful.
Yeah, this is Isaac Creek, and at times the fishing was just phenomenal there. There's a trail that Danny Roberts said he took from Fort Selkirk down to Isaac Creek, and he had a trap line sent down there. And and then it poured one year. It rained and rained, and had a hard time getting the fire started, but we did manage it. Boy,
In
stuck
the
with it.
lower left, you can see a Norwegian couple and their daughter. We allowed the kids to have wrist rockets. They had never shot a slingshot before, and they thought that was just great. I couldn't resist when I put this slideshow together to put a picture of my sons, Justin and Michael, in the upper right, fishing, and then a picture of Justin, and years later, fishing in the same creek.
Okay, Justin, I'd like you to tell the folks at home how much fun you're having.
Good times out here in the thunderstorms.
Right. And there's nothing like waiting out a thunderstorm in the brush.
That's right.
I'm sure both of you are enjoying it too.
You betcha.
All right.
Coffee Creek. We pulled into Coffee Creek the first time. We pulled up to the bank, and this guy, skinny, tall, lanky guy, walks out. He's got a rifle across his arm, a dog, a bandana, a floppy hat, and we both thought about a certain movie with banjos in it and such. Turned out to be a great guy. Took us into the cabin, and he left. He was there for a while. A family took over Coffee Creek and stayed and disappeared for some reason. I don't know, the Mounties came in and got him. Cowboy Smith, who was
the original
owner of it, yeah. And he had wheat fields back there that he harvested, and he also ran in the Iditarod. He was a pretty good musher, so it was a nice little place to stay.
Yeah, we stayed there the first few trips, but we didn't later on. Now it's a staging area for a mine that's over that way. Our next camp was at Kirkman Creek, and Linda Taylor was there on every trip. Well, she still owned it on every trip. One trip she actually wasn't there; they were in town.
Yeah. So we got there, and on the first trip we pulled in, and there was a lot of willows out there, and didn't know what was going on. So we got Scott Foss to go up. Scott goes up and says, the lady up here says we can camp on her lawn. We didn't see any lawn. We went up there through the brush, and there it was, as you can see on the bottom part there. So we did a good turn for her, because she was just awesome with us.
Yeah, she was raising those 7 kids by herself. Her husband had just died a short while before this picture was taken.
Right, yeah. And so we cut down all the willows on one of the trips, so she had a nice view. We cut firewood for her. She bottled her own root beer and had some
and baked bread.
Yeah, bread. And Becky brought out root beer and I guess muffins, sweet muffins on that first trip. Yeah, and we the root beer was in LeBlanc blue beer bottles.
And they wanted the bottle back.
So they wanted the bottles back, and the boys were going, "Oh, we got beer." No.
So what are you doing, Mike?
I'm writing extortion material down. I'm taking heavy notes on everybody and what's going on and what everybody has said on this trip, so that I can just, retire in a lot more comfort later on.
You mean what's said on the river doesn't stay on the river?
Sure, and it stays in this book too.
And in later years, she started charging people for things. Sometimes she'd charge us, sometimes not. But she also sold gold. In these pictures, you can see that we're still, in a couple of them, still traveling with the Norwegian family and their daughter. They're playing a game out in the field. The very bottom picture is a bullet hole from the shotgun from a bear run-in that we had on the family trip that sat and trapped Mike and Ann on the back half of their tent.
What do we got going on here? Stand in line for goodies or what?
Yep. No, of course.
Huh?
Yeah. Some root beer.
Pick it up on the last minute.
Root beer. Betcha. Beer. That is good.
There you go.
Tasty.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 3 is 15.
Okay. There, and let me get a bread.
And this was later in the summer from Kirkman Creek, and that's kind of dog days, warm, nice.
Thistle Creek is just a couple of miles down below Kirkman, and there was a family that was staying there, and I remember the boy's name was Guy, because Guy, the Guy pole is I think the right-hand pole on the sled. You know, Guy or Hob. The dogs will either go left or right. Anyway, they had a really nice cabin, but the river, as usual, just eroded the bank, and that cabin's gone and such. But they were mining upriver, I guess.
In later years, no one lived there, but the field that you see in this was all the brown is rhubarb. So we kind of look forward to getting there and harvesting some rhubarb.
We're at Flanagan's Slough, right above the White River, eating snacks and looking for fish and killing time.
Yeah,
And catching diamond willow.
Eating snacks and killing fish has interrupted our nap time.
The Flanagan's Slough was quiet water. Sometimes the fishing was good. The relaxing was great. And as you can see from the lower right, good place to work on diamond willow sticks.
The mouth of the White River, we could see it. The area was really nice, wooded, and we were allowed to stay there. Linda Taylor's father, Rudy, that was his trapping cabin.
And our first time there was pointed out by Fred Stretch, a guy that we met at Linda Taylor's place. He was a prospector, a miner, an engineer, and we spent that first evening in the cabin. He could tell stories about the Yukon, the Klondike for hours, and he was just a great guy to know. These are just scenes from around that campsite, the White River. I put the picture of the dogs on the upper right. That's Buck and Spitz from Jack London's Call of the Wild. The White River mouth is where the two fought it out, and the Spitz was defeated finally.
The bear left with the insurance intact. That's what Fred had said. The kids, he said there was a bear that came into the cabin and was walking in, and the boy said, "Well, what did you do, Fred?" "Canceled its insurance." And the hide was hanging up on the Linda Taylor's cabin back up at Kirkman.
Then a later year, on a trip, we came there, and we had a bear come into camp, which wasn't too big, but it wouldn't leave. And it came in a second time, and it was very close, and one of the scouts snatched up the shotgun, which was hanging on the front of the cabin, came running towards me, and literally kind of threw it sideways, which was easy to catch. And so we had a few tense moments. You could barely see the bear in the lower middle. And eventually it wouldn't leave. And so I shot a tree kind of close to it so it'd make a noise, and it took off from there.
Gold around the corner at Frisco Creek. Fred Stretch had finally found his stake, and his son was mining it at the time, and we down there and pulled in. And one time a bear had gotten in there and just trashed his buildings and everything. So he said, "Well, the next time you go up there," it was in 3 years, which was our rotation, he said, "I'll leave a mound of dirt with gold in it. You guys can go ahead and pan it." So the kids, as you can see, they panned it. We called them to dinner, and these are teenage boys. They didn't come to dinner. They were still panning gold. So we finally drug them away from the gold. The next morning, they were up early. The mound was gone. Little did we know that they had taken everything that could hold dirt in that mound and had packed it away in cans, jars, whatever, put it in their canoe, and then when we got out on the river and tied up, out came the gold pans, and they were mining down the river this gold. And we had told them, said, they talked about, why did the miners stay up there in such conditions? And I said, gold fever, and they just laughed. And then I have to look at that picture.
Yeah,
I
right.
just laughed.
Yeah, it didn't matter how small the little dinky specks of gold were. It was just, but they were into it.
Yeah.
As you can see from this, everybody's mining, different setups. It's a mini gold rush. Fred Stretch's son Eric was there sometimes, sometimes not. In some cases, on the upper left, he would take us back to where they were mining. You can see a made sluice box. The lower left is actually where they stayed. One guy in our group was so enamored with the whole thing that he stayed. That's a picture. We're leaving. And later on, Eric brought him down to Dawson, and we rejoined.
This is at Kirkman Creek, the cabins that Rudy Burian built, stacked
No,
with
not Kirkman
wood.
Creek, Stewart Island.
Stewart Island, yeah, sorry, yeah. Stewart Island. Well, the island is now gone because it's eroded. The paddle wheelers would tie up there, keep the paddle going, and just started eroding the bank. So all those cabins are gone. His house is gone.
Yeah, Rudy would rent these for what, like $10 a night?
I don't even think he charged us that much.
Yeah, it was something ridiculously low. They were immaculate inside, wooden stoves. It was so nice to stay there.
They were stocked with everything from the gold rush.
Right. The upper right is Rudy and his wife and his dog. Lower left is, you can see sort of, he had a little museum back there, and out front were moose antlers that were locked. The other two pictures shows, inside of the cabins.
Are you giving a history of this place?
No, why don't you give us a history?
Okay, down here we have the cabin that's been undercut by the river, about to fall in. Rudy's store is next. It's been shut since he died 6 years ago. There's a wood pile and outhouse. There's a new guest cabin that we're using for a cabin farther back where the boys are. There's Burian's house, the blue one, originally purchased from the Hudson Bay. And then we're down the way here. So.
Yeah, Rudy was instrumental on finding Jack London's cabin. He led a party back there along with the movie guy Eddie Albert. Well, Eddie Albert ran off with half the logs, and half the logs were taken into Dawson and formed the basis of a look-alike cabin that's still there. It was, like I said earlier, quite often the weather's good, you have squalls coming through. It's often warm because it's later in the summer.
Oh, the picture there. I'm in the canoe, and that's Burian's house.
Yeah, that's the house we just saw in the video.
The blue
roof
house.
of it.
Yeah, that's the roof. The island collapsed. The river tore it off its foundations. It was downriver about maybe a mile.
Yeah, not too far.
And we pulled in there, and there it was. It was too bad, but yeah, it was gone.
By this late in the trip, sometimes the boys were getting a bit tribal. That picture in the middle, anybody that's read
Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, Gouldy, I think of his name. Lord of the Flies will understand the symbolism there. Also, like I say, we meet more people along this stretch, and if they're in kayaks, generally you can bet they're Asian. And this is a group of people from China, but fortunately we had a guy that spoke fluent Mandarin with us. We're rafted up. Some days we'd spend time all tied together and just float. Other times we'd paddle.
Oh, just some pictures from around. The one on the top there with Gary and I, that's up the 60 mile.
Yeah, all this is the 60 mile.
Yeah, 60 mile up. Just at the mouth is Ogilvie Island, which Ogilvie established a trading post there at some time. And then that's the one on the top right is the mud rescue before he got pulled in.
And then the ones with me with the antlers, and then the lower right was the cabin that's up the 60 mile a little ways, and it belonged to Core and Igata, which were two of the people that we met at Fort Selkirk. She was the one skinning out the moose leg, and Core is the one with the red Voyager hat here.
We're camped on an island across from the mouth of the 60 mile, 2 days above Dawson. We had thought about camping up the 60 mile, but decided that it was too muddy, too wet, and the river's too high. We'd camped on a sandbar there before that's no longer there. Right now we're looking up the valley of the 60 mile across the Yukon. Now we're headed towards downriver. The sun's just setting barely over the hill on the ridge to the west, and canoes are pulled up in the mud, and we have to work hard not to get mud in everything, and this is downriver.
This is the last last day or 2 days of the trip. The upper right is the Germans. If we saw people with round barrels vertical in the canoe, you could almost bet they were German. The people you meet on the river, the most common nationality is German, and the second became Chinese. Americans and Canadians are down the list a ways. The lower left, commercial traffic, because there's some mines, as we mentioned, at Minnow and Coffee Creek. Supply boats, you'd see those. And also, you'd start running into law enforcement. The guy in the Zodiac was a fish and game, a Canadian fish and game, who we met, and we talked into a heck of a nice guy. We talked him into camping with us, and the next morning we took, and again, he's like Fred Stretch, tells stories for hours, have super heavy French accent. And the next day he got a call that there was a wounded, injured Dall sheep upriver, and asked if a couple of us wanted to go with him, so we did. And the small picture, I ran into him 7 years later on a driving trip up through the area, and that's a picture of my wife and Gerard.
Oh, Galena Creek, yeah, 40-year identity crisis. It changed hands multiple times. Every time we go down there, there'd be somebody else in there working and such. A lot of cabins there. One group took over, and we couldn't even get up into the area that were under the shelter or anything without paying, and so we just moved on downriver and such. But they had raspberries, wild raspberries. Dogs, a couple of times they had treated a porcupine up a tree, and it came down, decided to come down, and the dog had to go into the vet.
Yeah, you just get the feeling that somebody moves in, thinks they have an idea of how to make it pay, and it doesn't, so 3 years later, there's somebody else there trying the same thing, and that doesn't work either.
No, nice place, though.
Yeah, great place.
That's a gorgeous view. If you don't know it's there, you wouldn't know it's there. It just tucked way back. You got to pull into this, off of the river into this cove, and then you got this little trail that you go up, and then it levels out, and you've got all these cabins and everything. So
it was pointed out to us originally by Fred Stretch.
Right, yeah.
So, or like we'd gone by it a few times and never knew it was there.
No.
This is Mike's and my last days on the river. There were 2 different trips, both adult trips. So we're getting very close to Dawson here.
Yeah.
And pulling into Dawson.
Well, yeah, there's the
Moose Side.
Yes.
Moose Side slide.
Yeah, the slide that's up there, and you can go up on the mountain at night and midnight, and it's still light up there, and see up and down up and down the river, and until they put in a levee across there. You can see there's a church, I think there maybe, or a government building. That's a church, yeah.
It's a church.
You can see the buildings. The whole place would flood. They had just wooden sidewalks, and the government, the Yukon, said, "Hey, you're gonna have to do something about this flooding." So they put in a levee, dikes all the way down there to keep the river out instead of the mud and the water flowing in. But that's where we were.
Then, and all except for the first couple trips, we'd stay at the hostel there. It's across the river, so you'd have to take the ferry back and forth. But we'd land. You had carts there. You could push the canoes up the hill, and then stay for a fairly reasonable cost.
Oh, a lot of things to do. The best thing was the Palace Grand Theater. They had summer stock people go up there. The one show that they did just once was it was a musical on the Klondike. You know, started in Seattle and up it went. It was just stunning. There was a guy at the middle and the bottom. I'm sitting on Robert Service's front porch, and he had an accent that was I don't know, Scottish or
definitely,
yeah, and he recited Service's poetry, gave history of him. It was great. We'd be there on July 1st, which is Canada Day, and celebrate that in Dawson. And then all the Dawsonites would come down on the 4th of July and celebrate the Independence Day with us down in Skagway, or whoever was in Skagway.
On Canada Day,
yeah.
they often, go back to where we were. They had the North American Panning Championships, as you can see in the lower left here. And they had music and Mounties and, very Canadian.
Yeah.
And this basically ended the trip. It was always kind of a dash back to the ferry. We'd load up. Our drivers would be there. We'd say goodbye to old friends like Becky, who was from Kirkman Creek, and a little girl on our first trip, to the people we traveled with.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to say, Gary and I both agreed that on every single one of these trips when we had the Scouts, we only had one little dust up one time, that a little clashing of what I want this and whatever, and that ended very easily. Those kids, I was so grateful that they grew up in Sitka in southeast Alaska. The weather did not bother them. We had some rainouts that would have just crushed, I'm sure, other trips. Not a whimper from them. They worked in Icy Creek for over an hour because it had just been pouring down to get a fire going. There was just no quit in them. So really appreciated the kids. They're really easy to manage. Gary and I both said, hey, we could take this trip, just you and I, with these Scouts,
Yeah.
And it would not have been a problem.
It would be fine.